Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 12. Let the nightmare begin. The Silent Guest. January 21st, 1922. I reached the farm just a few hours ago, and it is more than I could have possibly imagined. I knew as soon as I arrived that I had made the right choice. I was so uncertain about leaving the Whitakers' home. I had been there for so long, but the allure of a better pay here at the Hales farmstead was too much to resist. The Hales have been very kind in our relations, and I expect that should continue, which pleases me greatly. They've been very respectful and forthcoming with me about what I should expect working as a maid on their farm. That's not to say the Whitaker family lacked any manner of generosity, but there were times where I often felt invisible. Mr. Hale and his wife treated me almost as if I were family the moment we met. "You're going to be living in our home and tending to our children," Thomas Hale told me. Catherine said, "It's only right we treat you as one of us." Though the pay increase is much appreciated, I must admit it was that sort of kinship Mr. and Mrs. Hale expressed that really brought me to their home. It is absolutely beautiful here, even in the winter months. I was rather amused when the driver turned onto an almost invisible dirt path off the main road. I hadn't noticed it was there. It took me by surprise to see just how long the path was, as it seemed to stretch for miles. But it was relaxing to see nothing but a canopy of leafless tree branches overhead, as dark as that may sound, despite the cold emptiness of the frozen woods. I found myself feeling tranquil at the sight of such peculiar beauty. Before I knew it, the surrounding woods had suddenly opened its embrace. The path cleared into a large, open field in which the Hales farmstead was visible in the distance. I was mesmerized instantly. The field was covered in a light, white frost which glimmered in the morning sun. I could see several farmhands tending to their duties. The woods that tightly surrounded the vehicle as the driver brought us down the road, now spread out and wrapped around the entire farm, creating some sort of barricade that hides it from the rest of the world. It is all truly amazing how it appears now in the winter. I cannot imagine how it must look in the warm months of summer. I would not say this is paradise by any means, but it is certainly a place that felt like home, and that is all I could have hoped for. Mr. Hale has given me the day to get familiar with their home and its residents. Later on, I shall be acquainted with my duties, and then I will meet the children. Tomorrow will be my first real day, and I am truly excited. January 22nd, 1922. Today was my first day performing my duties around the Hale farmstead. Since I'm not one of the farm hands, my work kept me within the confines of their home. Not that I'm complaining. I am no farmer by any means, nor would I want to be. Yesterday, Mr. Hale took me on a tour of his farmstead and introduced me to all his employees. They were all very kind and appear to be hard workers. I admire and appreciate their resolve and dedication. Aside from that, I also got to meet some of the more wild inhabitants. I've never had the opportunity to be up close and personal with animals such as these. The pigs and cows were rather bland, but horses always appear so majestic. Mrs. Hale also took the time to introduce me to her children. Samuel is 7 and Emily is only 3. They are both so adorable, what with their matching blonde hair and cute little smiles. Samuel was surprisingly caring of his baby sister. It was very sweet to watch him play with her. Though I don't believe I'll personally be spending much time with the children unless Mrs. Hale asks it of me. I will be happy to see their young faces each day. I love children, and these two seem to be the sweetest. Mostly, I'll be tidying up the household. It is rather large, but that keeps it all the more interesting. I've never minded cleaning, especially not a home such as this. Mrs. Hale keeps such a lovely home. I had half a mind to ask her why she decided to hire me in the first place. When I was just getting into contact with the Hales, I was told the old maid had to leave to take care of an ill relative, but that was months ago. Clearly, Mrs. Hale has been able to do just as well a job as anyone that could be paid to do it. Still, I won't be the one to judge. I'm thankful to have this employment. She has obviously worked hard to keep the house as nice as it is, and I'll gladly be the one to make sure it stays that way. It is getting late, and I'm not quite used to this schedule just yet. It has started to snow, so I think I'll enjoy the view of the farm from my window before I get to bed. January 23rd, 1922. Something strange happened today. While I was dusting the windows, I noticed a commotion going on outside involving Mr. Hale and one of the farmhands. Matthew, I think his name is. They seem to be in a rather heated argument. I believed I would do well to mind my own business. But when I saw the children watching from another window, I decided it might be best to interrupt before they were subjected to any more undesirable behavior. I opened the door and walked over to them. They hadn't noticed me until I was upon them, asking if everything was all right. Mr. Hale seemed surprised to see me, but Matthew engaged me immediately. He told me I'd be crazy to stay here and that I should leave the farm like the last maid. When Matthew mentioned this, Mr. Hale seemed rather annoyed. I didn't understand, so when I inquired about it, Mr. Hale was quick to try and shut down the subject. But Matthew caught on before he could do so and explained it to me. Apparently, the maid before me did not leave because of an ill relative like I was originally told, but rather because she feared the farm was haunted. I didn't know how to respond to this information, but before I could say anything, Matthew grabbed my arm and brought me over to a certain area in the snow. Mr. Hale protested, but did not physically intervene. Then Matthew pointed to the snow and told me to look. What he showed me was indeed eerie. Footprints that came all the way from the edge of the woods into the farm. Matthew looked at me, petrified, but I didn't completely understand his fear. He saw the puzzlement in my face, and immediately, almost as if it should have been obvious, he explained his fears. There are none leading back, he tells me. I've looked, and there are none. I didn't know what to make of such information, but I didn't really have a chance to discuss it with him either. He left the farm immediately after, and I don't expect he'll return. Mr. Hale, however, was honest with me. He explained why he had lied about the last maid. He didn't want to put off possible replacements because of her own paranoia. That was something I understood, as I doubt many women would be as happy to work here. If they were under the impression that it was haunted, I'm not sure I would have even taken the job myself had I known that. But I can't say I'm a strong believer in such nonsense. A moment ago, I believe I heard footsteps in the attic. They were very brief and light, but noticeable. I can see now that I'm letting my own paranoia and imagination get the better of me. I think it's time for bed. January 25th, 1922. A couple of days have passed since I last wrote. Not much has occurred since then. Yesterday, Mr. and Mrs. Hale both sat me down and apologized to me personally for not being honest about their previous maid. I assured them I took no offense and that I understood their reasoning, but they still seemed rather ashamed of it. I think they were also ashamed of the notion that they have a haunted home, but I told them that idea was silly. I truthfully felt bad for them. I knew they were very caring people, and I made sure that they knew that. Still, I could not help but feel like they were feeling guilty about having misled me. So I tried to cheer them up with a few good laughs. It lightened the mood a bit, and they appeared appreciative of my understanding and lightheartedness. Matthew, as I expected, did not return to the farm, but it did not seem to affect the efficiency of running the farm for Mr. Hale. The animals still get fed, the pens still get cleaned, the eggs still get collected. It's obvious that the farmstead can survive a spooked worker or two. As for the footprints in the snow, they've since faded with wind and more snow. No other farm hands seem to care. They either didn't notice or thought the money was far more important than being worried of ghastly entities. Even so, Mr. Hale had some of his men scour the area as a precaution, to be sure no one was lurking around the farm. He has mentioned to me that he has had trouble with stolen livestock in the past, But all such matters had always been resolved quickly, despite being very closed off from the rest of the world. The people in this area are actually a part of a very tight-knit community. If someone tries to sell a stolen animal to another farm, it's not hard to determine if that animal initially belonged to someone else close by. However, the men never found any intruders, nor did they find any missing livestock. It would appear that everything was normal, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. Unless, of course, there is a ghost. Whatever the case, a few strange occurrences here, and there probably won't hurt anyone. January 26th, 1922. Today was a very cold day. The snow continues to pile on little by little. I've noticed that some here are not as fond of it as I am, but I suppose they knew what they were getting themselves into. Personally, I love waking up and going right to my window. I don't mind sitting in the frigid draft it lets in when I am able to see snowflakes falling for what seems like miles. It is truly beautiful. When I exited my room this morning, I found a newspaper in front of my door. It was a brand I did not recognize, from an area I did not know. Not only that, but it was also several days old. Regardless, I don't know where it came from or who it belonged to, but it was not mine. I do not read newspapers. I decided to go see Mr. Hale about it, to see if maybe someone left it there by accident. When I asked him about it, he told me he thought it could be mine because it was a paper he didn't recognize from anyone else on the farm, seeing as I would be the newest inhabitant of the farm. He left it at my doorstep thinking it belonged to me. I explained to him that it wasn't mine, that I don't even read newspapers, and that I wasn't sure who it belonged to. He had a curious expression on his face. That told me he was unsure of where this paper could have come from, if not from me. But I don't think either of us care enough to take the subject any further. So he took the paper and threw it in the trash. Later on, when I was busy doing laundry, Mrs. Hale came to me asking if I knew where the house keys might be. I told her that the last I saw them, they were hanging on the hook where they were always supposed to be. But I had to admit that I wasn't exactly sure of the last time I actually did see them, as it's something I never thought to take notice of. She was not angry, but there was obvious worry on her face. I believe she may be under the impression that one of the farm hands had taken them. She never did seem to trust them. Before I came to my room this evening, I asked her if she ever found them. She said she hadn't, but was certain she had just misplaced them. They'll turn up eventually, she told me. She's probably right. We all misplace things in the most obvious of places. The creaking steps are back. I really should ask Mr. Hale about that. I'm starting to think one of the children tends to wander at night, though I haven't a clue why they would venture into the attic. January 27th, 1922. I am so happy. I am so happy. This place is wonderful. I hope to stay here forever. I want to live here forever. I want to die here forever. I think I will. It is so beautiful. Good night, Eleanor. January 28th, 1922. Report of Officer Henry Lowell. When I and the other officers had first arrived at the scene of the crime, I had not believed anything had appeared amiss. But the farmhands who had alerted us were terrified. When I asked them where Mr. Hale was, they told me to go into the barn. At first, I did not understand. I slowly proceeded to the barn and noticed something peculiar about the farm. And that peculiarity was that everything was normal. The animals were well fed and taken care of, and there was smoke spewing from the home of the Hale family, where I assumed they must be. What was off, however, is why all of this appeared so normal. The farm looked like it had been kept in check, as it usually is. Yet here are the farmhands scared out of their wits. It was for that reason instinct told me to draw my firearm as I approached the barn. The other officers did the same as they saw my gesture. It would turn out that my weapon would prove to be unnecessary, or more appropriately, it would prove to be too late. As I opened the barn door, I was greeted by a ghastly smell that I had never smelled before in this small town. Initially, I could not pinpoint the origin of the stench, but once we moved deeper into the barn, we discovered the source. A grisly scene of death that I had never been unfortunate enough to witness in my career until now. One of the officers under me vomited immediately. Another walked out of the barn almost as soon as he walked in, crying. Others simply turned in disgust. But I stood there, staring at the bodies. We saw blood, and dread, and death, and a confusing set of yet unseen events that somehow led to it. There were 2 bodies in the barn. I knew them personally. Thomas Hale, the owner of this farm, was a good man, and undeserving of this fate. May God rest his soul. I found him in a pile of hay lying face down, with a hole like wound in the back of his head. I found Catherine a few feet away, lying in the dirt with a similar wound. Judging from how we found them, with wounds in the back of their heads, lying face first on the ground, I would assume that their murderer or murderers had forced them into the barn, where they were then executed whilst on their knees. To see Thomas and Catherine like this, words cannot describe. But then I remembered the 2 had children, and an unyielding fear came over me. It was at this point I pulled 2 of my better composed men aside and instructed them to stay at my rear and be on their guard. Together, we walked toward the family's home, and I remember an insatiable wrath in me as I knew what I was going to find. We entered through the front door, I with my weapon hanging steady in the air. I don't know if I actually believed the perpetrator would still be present, but I know that I wanted that to be so. I moved past the stairway and down the hall into the kitchen. There had been some crumbs left behind on a plate. I cannot say for certain if the suspect had stayed for a time after the crime, or if he had interrupted the family in the middle of a meal. It should be noted, however, that there was just 1 plate. I had turned around from there and proceeded to check the rest of the rooms on the first floor, but found nothing out of place. There had been no sign, as far as I could tell, that anything had been taken from the home. In fact, there was some bit of money on a table that remained untouched. It would seem this was not a robbery, but rather the result of a monstrous activity with no real explanation. When I found myself back at the stairs, I and the other officers continued upward to find what I feared yet expected all along. Despite that, I was always at the ready to pull the trigger on my firearm. At the top of the stairs, we came upon an elongated hallway, with rooms located on each side, and another set of stairs to the 3rd floor at the end. I knew that the children's room was at the end of the hall, on the left-hand side by those stairs. I could see the door from where I stood. It remained closed. Every other door was opened. There was the master bedroom, which appeared to have been unused, and then there were the 2 guest bedrooms, one of which had looked as if it were recently used. This angered me, but I do not believe the other officers understood the sick and twisted sense of humor from the perpetrator that I saw in it. After determining that these first few rooms were safe, we moved forward toward the children's room. When I reached the door, I stood there for a moment, considering whether or not it were wise to look inside. Unfortunately, as an officer of the law, I did not truly have the luxury of that choice. But as commanding officer at the crime scene, I could save my fellow officers from having to bear witness to what I knew I was going to see. I had them return back down the stairs, and once they had all vacated the area, I continued. I put my hand on the door knob, twisted it, and entered. I was in the room for 5 minutes, and I only got as far as 2 steps before I could not bring myself to move anymore. I cannot and will not record in this report what I saw, nor will I ever speak of it to anyone ever. It was a sight that as few people as possible should have to see, let alone hear of, and it will haunt me for the rest of my days. When I was able to regain my composure, I backed out of the room and shut the door. I made sure the other officers were still out of sight. If I became lucky enough to find this scum of God's beautiful earth, then I wanted to be the one to send him back to hell from where he came. But I would not get that chance. I proceeded up to the 3rd floor. Here there were only 2 more rooms and a ceiling door to the attic. The room on the right appeared to be used for storage, and the room on the left contained another gruesome sight that I admittedly did not expect to see. It was the maid's room, and she was still present. She lay with her head down at her desk, but facing the doorway. I assumed she was left like this intentionally. Her throat was cut, and she was covered in her own drying blood. She had a horrific look on her face, as if she were staring past me and at me in the same moment, and her mouth hung open, contorted in a strange way, like she had been murdered in the middle of her screams. Her left arm was hanging off her desk, but her right was still posted on top of it. I approached the victim and saw that the right hand was placed on top of a book. Looking closer, I saw that this book was actually a diary. I reluctantly moved the hand to pick up the diary and found something underneath, a blood-written number, 34. I knew what it meant right away, so I turned to the page. The following is what was written on that page, in a maid's blood. To whomever this may concern, I hope you like my work. I made sure I got every last one of them. I got them at night. First, the parents, who I led to the barn. They begged. They always beg. Next, the kids, who thought they could hide from me, but I was smarter. Then there was the maid. She was fun, asleep when I found her. Before I finished with her, I took her on a tour around the farm to show her my work. Then I brought her back here and made her write her last entry. I thought that would be funny. Then she got boring, so I shut her up forever. She was loud anyway. Could barely get her to stop talking even after I cut her. They never saw me coming. I was here for a long time before anyone noticed, and when they noticed, it was too late. I came in from the woods and stayed under the wooden floor of the barn. They searched the whole farm and never checked there. I think that's funny. I stayed here for a time after I did my work. I like farms. Reminds me of home and family. I love animals too, so I took care of them. I slept in one of the rooms below. Not bad, but I've had better. Not to mention that fucking noise. At first, I thought I had another plate toy hiding up in the attic. But after searching it, I found nobody. There wasn't a damn thing, except a set of keys. So I left. It scared me, to be honest with you. I'm a God-fearing man, and I know well enough that the sound of footsteps made by nobody is downright unholy. Damn near burnt the place down after that. But I realized that would take away the glory of my work. So here it is. Enjoy it. Don't look for me. I'm long gone. And a word of advice, friend. Don't go into that attic. There's someone up there even I couldn't get to. Regards. TF. Whispering Hollow. So, 3 friends and I decided we were going to camp out in this 30-acre sanctuary down the street from my neighborhood. It's paralleled by railroad tracks and a road on one side, and then a small road on the other side. There's a lot of forest and trails, but also these big sand dunes and a huge lake that is pretty deep. So deep we can't see the bottom. And in Florida, there's always shit to worry about, like mosquitoes at night and spider webs along the wooded paths. Snakes thankfully left us alone. Now understand, when I say 3 friends, I mean 2 friends and sort of my friend's uncle. So that's Tobias, Rhett, and Jace. Tobias is cool when it comes to nature and a survivalist guy. Rhett's my best friend, and he's funny but can get freaked out as easily as me. Then there's Uncle Jace, the horrible uncle with the shit-eating grin that you'd never let your kids hang out with. He's awesome. We settled on 3 nights, so we got ourselves a big tent and brought 2 coolers worth of shit out there. The sun's high up in the sky, and there's no clouds anywhere to be seen. It was a lovely day in autumn, which meant it wasn't nearly as hot as Florida sounds like. As we unload our truck at the front of the trail, we kind of had to hide the truck because there are no trespassing signs in a few places, but I see people out here occasionally, so I think it more or less was a dumping warning. We noticed that there are absolutely no footprints this time. I thought that was odd, but Jace just drew a dick in the sand. As we're walking out there, Tobias is explaining that this area used to be home to the Ace tribe that was fond of East Florida. It was interesting to listen to because apparently they built both mounds and thatch huts and stuff like that. Jace asked us if we'd ever heard of a banshee. To this, I sort of face-bombed and Rhett laughed. Jace even chuckled and said he'd keep it for the night. We lugged our shit some ways, passing a few retention ponds and an open area towards the railroad crossing, and had a drainage ditch on the other side. The trail ran down pretty far until it turned into a huge scrublands area that then turned into another scrubland cutoff by huge trees. You know, the kind of huge tree that's so thick you can't tell if it's just now popping out of the ground or not. I always thought the place was cool, but I wasn't sure how I'd feel being here overnight. We passed the big trees, and it opened up into a shaded place with pine leaves forming their own little hills, and then the huge sand dunes hugged by the Floridian forest. Then just touching the right tip of the place was this body of water we nicknamed Whispering Hollow. Most of the place was either sand or little scrubbery pushing up out of it, and right along the banks of the lake was a down telephone line. God knows how old. We decided to lug our shit up the side of the dunes because they turned into some secluded trails. We found the opportune location too. It was a huge open area of sand with a patch of tree jutting up on the outskirts from the left side of the entrance, and then all wood on the right side spare for a small path that seemed barely beaten. This is where we would set up shop. Within the hour we had the huge tent up, and Tobias went off with Rhett to collect some firewood. Florida's really bad on that part, so we'd use palm fronds to get the fire going and use actual wood to keep it burning. Good thing to know in Florida, because the skeeters hate thick smoke. Since I was at the campsite with just Uncle Jace, he brought some gin and popped it open. I never had alcohol in my life, and I was just now 18, so I knew he'd try to have me drink some. Sure enough, here you go, Eli. I told him no naturally, but my own curiosity was getting to me. I knew Rhett would jump at the chance to drink some gin or Mountain Bush, and I knew Tobias would side with me. I told him to wait until the others returned. That way I'd at least have someone to agree with. That's when we heard it the first time. A wail that sounded like it came from the base of the dunes. It was so close the hairs on the back of my neck were livid for seconds. Jace just laughed and cupped his hands. Will you silly nanny stop playing in the sand? Just as he had said that, Rhett stepped out of the woods, firewood in arms, and into the campsite to ask what all of that was. Jace and I asked him where Tobias was, and he thumbed over his shoulder that he was still carrying some palm fronds with him. You mean you weren't the ones who just made that wailing down there? Jace asked him, folding his arms together. Jace, I'm being completely serious right now. You know if I was fucking with you. Jace sighed deeply and told him to bring Tobias back to the camp. He turned to me. Eli, you're coming with me. I looked awkward and asked him why, since I wasn't used to being entirely alone with the guy. Because if this turns out to be Dirty Mike and the boys, I need someone to trip so I can get away. So I went with him. We walked down the sand dunes, having to pick our feet up because of the sand. And when we got to the bottom, we did a scan of the area. Honestly, the only thing that had changed was the position of the sun and the brightness of the horizon. It was now dusk, barely dark, but getting there. I turned to Uncle Jace, who was rather puzzled himself, and asked him what he thought it was. He just said it had to be a Tyrannosaurus in heat. Now I couldn't help but laugh. Jace was definitely the comic relief of us, but even so he looked concerned. He said he brought the machete for wood cutting, but told me it was inside the tent near the back if I needed it. We shrugged the whole thing off after that, and swapped some stories around the campfire. Thankfully, the mosquitoes were nowhere to be found. Tobias continued to tell us more about the location and how the Ace were also hunter-gatherers. That meant they didn't farm or grow anything, but they hunted animals and gathered resources to survive. Rhett told us about some of the spooky stories he'd read on a late at night, and for the most part, some of what he told us was genuinely spooky. Jace even contributed by telling us more about the banshees and how they wailed and the person would always die nearby. But that sounded rather vague. Jace opened his mouth and screamed horrifyingly after the silence settled in, and Tobias was shaking his ass off. Of course, we all laughed at him and told him the banshee was going to get him. Yeah, the rest of the night consisted of Jace fucking with Tobias. There was even one moment in the tent where Jace told him, "Calm down, Toby. Banshees only show up when there's a flash of light." After a few seconds, Jace lightly held down the button on the flashlight and Tobias screamed, "F-U-C-K." The next day, we woke up and went about our business of taking a piss off in the woods or going down to the lake just to enjoy the morning breeze. But I noticed something odd. Upon walking down the reclusive hill, there was something amiss in the dunes themselves. I saw our footprints, which were hugely distorted due to the sand, and then I saw what appeared to be deep impressions like something on all fours had bolted up the hill or down it. They were just so perfect that it couldn't be real. I'm paranoid about these things, so I constantly had my eyes glued to the trails that we came from and others we hadn't checked out yet, which I knew if we were, I'd be bringing Tobias or all of them along. I really didn't feel like going alone after the whale yesterday. I sat on the down telephone pole to wash my face off from the water, and that's when I noticed it. Jace's bottle of gin, still half filled like he left it, just dropped in the sand in front of me. I blinked blankly, figuring Jace must have wandered out last night or early in the morning and drunkenly left it here. I went back up to our spot where Rhett brought more wood to and asked Uncle Jace about his bottle. He tilted his head and asked me where I found it. I told him down by the lake. He told me to stop fucking with him. You didn't get up early in the morning and take it down there. He told me no, but I raised my eyebrows at him. So you weren't hammered? I sounded like an idiot, sure, but knowing Jace, he could be hatching some kind of prank on us as we spoke. Bottom line was he said he didn't move it, so I just gave him the gin and sat down at the camp. It was pretty lazy for the rest of the morning. All we did was eat some of our canned stuff and decided which trails we'd go down. Naturally, since the place we were at is connected to an actual nature park, we thought we'd try seeing if we could reach it. So we chose the path going around the side of Whispering Hollow. Jay stayed behind and made some phone calls while we went out there, since animals could have gotten into our shit if we just left it. This little dirt road had the retention ditch adjacent to it, with big tilapia swimming freely and at least a 12-foot stumble if someone tripped. And boy, it was far. By 2 p.m., we'd probably walked at least 3 miles or so, and I could barely believe that myself. The place was supposed to be 30 acres, and the fact that this trail rarely curved or made a turn bothered me at how far we'd gotten from the sand dunes. The only thing we had here were jagged trees, an overlying canopy of Spanish moss, and the just barely audible noise of the highway. So we weren't entirely that far from civilization. Our big problem now was that the path split into 3. They all looked the same, spare for the center being riddled with pine needles. So we went down the mid-path, figuring less sand meant easier walking. The whale again, from yesterday. As soon as I heard it in front of us, I teared up. Consider myself a pussy, but I knew it wasn't Jay screwing with us. There was no way he could have been ahead at this rate. Tobias was giving us worried looks, but he brought out his 6-inch knife, and Rhett told me to lie low. We were all speaking so softly that it was almost surreal. Tobias, though easily spooked, seemed so calm here. He slowly went ahead, minding where he put his footsteps because the pine needles didn't actually make too much of a noise. So while he slowly progressed 20 yards ahead of us, and also remember that the trail is pretty isolated in the forest at this point, Rhett and I covered our 6. We noticed something really strange just lying off to the edge of the pine-needled path. I wanted to say no. I wanted to deny every ounce of it. But there was no denying the fact that an unopened can of mountain bush was right here, far from our camp. The damn thing still had precipitation on it. I told Rhett I was really fucking scared right now, and he nodded and nudged me towards Tobias. We decided we'd head back to the camp and tell Jace about it. Something entered our peripheral vision. A blurring mix of gray and white ran from one side of the path to the other. One thing I remember definitively were 3 bony fingers on each hand passing through the bush and leaving nearly no trace that it was there. I've never seen Tobias hop to his feet and sprint as quick as he did, but we were all on our feet. As a matter of fact, I've never seen my own 2 feet work like they did. We forgot taking him back and just ran as fast as we possibly could back to the lake. And we didn't stop there. We ran up the sand dunes, nearly collapsing because of the thick sand, and shouted for Jace. Jace wasn't there. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought. We shouted for Jace for several minutes, looking all around. Tobias checked the cooler and did a count of our stuff, while Rhett kept pacing back and forth, calling Jace on his phone. What are you sissies screaming about? Jace answered the phone. We found out he had walked back to the truck to go to the 7 to 11 down the road, but he told us he was pulling back up. He asked us if we were really going to pussy out of our only time together over break, and we decided we would just meet him at the front and tell him what happened. Fuck staying behind at the camp. None of us were man enough to do it after what we just witnessed. We made our way back past the two large trees and down the long trail until we found Jace walking up with a bag of potato chips and some water. He thought our expressions were hilarious, but asked us what was going on. Once we told him, he was almost in disbelief. Jace asked us if we took his machete, and I answered no for him. He told us we should consider knowing where it is if we seriously saw something. The rest of the day consisted of us staying near the tent, not really going anywhere alone anymore. We had all stepped down near the lake because Rhett and I started goofing around. We were wrestling, causing a huge dust cloud from rolling down the dunes. Jace loved it because I was being so desperate to kick Rhett's ass, yet I wasn't built like he was. And Jace, seeing another opportunity to fuck with Tobias, did the banshee cry yet again. Only this time, off in the distance, the same wail from before answered him. We all said, "What the fuck?" at nearly the same instant. This was when Jace stood up and scanned the perimeter, making his own checks of everything. "See, Eli, this is why you need to get your concealed weapons permit," he said, walking down to help us up. When I asked him why, he answered, "You really think I'm allowed to carry a gun?" We weren't very talkative the rest of the night. We sat around the campfire paranoid, tried roasting some marshmallows and playing some music from our cell phones, but it was hard to shake the feeling that we were under surveillance. You know, like there could be big red eyes somewhere just watching, waiting. Jace kept his machete by his legs, and Tobias had taken his own knife and carved the end of this long stick to make a spear. This is how spooked we really were. There was something out here, and we were alone. "Look, guys, if you really want to just get the fuck out of here, we can. I'll just drive us back to Eli's place." At that point, we were all ready to get up and go, so there were no objections. Some camping trip this turned out to be. Jay stood up and lit a cigarette for a few moments, then muttered profanities to himself. He turned to us with a half grin, half frown. "You guys are gonna hate me. I think I dropped my car keys." Of course, we all gawked and asked him if he was serious or if he was fucking with us. Because, of course, Jace has been known to do that, but he was serious. He fanned out his pockets and checked all over camp, using his cell phone as a light. So that's really it. We were fucking stuck here unless we wanted to walk the whole way back to my house. And frankly, we were tired and our hearts were still pounding from earlier. We just wanted to dig in and hold until daylight. We cut this trip short, making it 2 days instead of 3. So we all huddled like frightened animals in the middle of the tent. That primal fear kicked in of being exposed or being towards the outside of the tent. Jace slept next to his machete, keeping his shoulder on it. Tobias and I couldn't sleep, and Rhett drank some of Jace's gin to try and keep himself sleeping. Tobias was petrified and told me not to close my eyes. His paranoia made it harder on my own, and we kept ourselves up for as long as I can remember. We heard the mosquitoes on the outside of the tent. We heard some splashing down near the lake, and we heard a train horn eerily pass by. It must have been 3 hours before we finally started settling in. I was about to bury myself in my sleeping bag when my ears sprang alert. There was a thumping of sand being thrown around. It was getting closer and more to our ground level. I dare not sit up, but I started to tear up once more. That thing was bolting up the hill and into our campsite, just like it probably did the night before. I held my breath as the thing's heavy exhalation passed on my side of the tent. Its footfalls weren't too powerful. The thing appeared like it was trying to sneak around. It also slowed down now that it was on even terrain. Now I couldn't help it. I turned slowly and silently to see Tobias' eyes completely open, staring straight at me. He was shitting bricks so bad, but I wasn't going to call him out on anything. This was horrifying, and I really thought about the possibility that this monster could kill us with those long, bony fingers. While it sulked around the camp and went through our cooler, I nodded towards Jace's machete. Tobias tried to take it, but Jace was too heavy, so we had to wake everyone up. I brought a hand out and suggested prodding Jace with his stick, so we did. Jace quietly groaned, but we covered his mouth. Before he could object, we heard the cooler spill and all the shit pour out. The thing outside grunted, and its heavy breathing panicked for a moment before subsiding. The thing's fingers were tapping on the insides, and it lapped up the water like a big dog would. Jace wanted to whisper, but we frantically shook our heads against the idea. So instead of talking, he mouthed stuff to us. It was hard to understand him, but he reluctantly spoke. "Wake up, Rhett. Sit up slowly." We all remained silent, for the night around us had as well. We were almost terrified that it hurt him. I couldn't stop shaking, as if I got the chills. But we were reassured that the thing was still there, because it started digging in the sand for some reason. And the sand smashed against the outside of our tent, like we were being pelted with tiny pebbles. We pushed on Rhett's shoulder, and he muttered, "What?" Jay sat up and held the machete ready because the thing outside had stopped digging in the sand. We clasped our hands over Rhett's mouth and whispered into his ear to sit up slowly, which he did with uneasiness. The thing was casting a shadow over our tent now. It was just taller than Jace, who was prime in that category here. Like a grizzly bear or something, it stood to full height to observe the tent. It had to be at least 10 feet away, right against the heavy forest. And since we were all on our knees inside the tent, we weren't even half of its height. Uncle Jace raised the blade, his own tattooed hand shaking. The monster moved its legs and stalked towards our tent. It extended an arm to poke the tent, running its delicate fingers across the fibers. Its breathing pushed in on the tent and out. The shadow gradually turned, and its hands ran over the entrance, particularly along the zipper line. I was literally holding Rhett's hand in a completely maternal instinct. This was real. This was a real nightmare. A story you'd read or a movie you'd watch. And I was in the middle of it. My heart was pounding so hard that I could not only hear it, but feel it in every ounce of my body. He could feel it too, as he squeezed my hand. Even Tobias, who was sitting by himself, was literally losing his shit in the calmest way imaginable. Because if we weren't calm, I thought we'd be dead. The fingers finally found the zipper. It fiddled and experimented with it, and the thing looked like it had difficulty understanding. It pulled out on the tent, moving us a few inches. Then it pulled up, started unzipping the tent. It was halfway unzipped when Jay struck. He lunged out at it, swiping the thing across its arm, and the monster letting out a shrill that could boil blood. We all screamed. Seeing the thing roll around in the sand with Jace grunting to stay on it. They knocked over the ash pile and the partially burnt bonfire, and dust was in the air. Everywhere. It was horrible because we didn't know what to do. We were fucking sitting here, watching my best friend's uncle fight off a creature with his blade, and we weren't sure who was winning. I don't even remember much of the fighting. I just recall being petrified at the skeletal humanoid monster that, in the middle of this fight, had glowing yellow eyes and snarled like something neither from hell nor earth. Tobias took both Rhett and me by the arms and ushered us down the hill. Rhett didn't want to leave Jace, but Tobias said tough shit and told him we were going to dig in. I reminded him that this thing was 6 feet tall and fast, but it didn't matter to us anyway. We were in the sand dunes in pitch black, and there was absolutely nothing keeping it from bolting down the dunes and ripping us apart. We saw them hurtling down the hill, Jace literally punching the fucking thing now with his fists. He didn't even have the big knife in his hands anymore, until I noticed it was protruding from the creature's gut. And what's worse is, the thing was digging its claws into his shoulder. It looked damaging, like someone dragging a dissection tool across the skin. In their struggle, the thing must have rocked back and forth because Jace's neck was pretty diced. Now with Jace bleeding from his neck, we really knew we had to do something or else he could die. Or we could all die. So Jace, groaning from his pain, finally kicks the thing off of him and stands up. He's literally dripping blood down his shoulders. The creature, on the other hand, just sits there, its body churning inwards and outwards, catching its breath and recuperating. We all hauled ass. Fuck everything back at the camp. The sand made it difficult to sprint, and that made things even scarier. The thing could lunge and snatch any of us at the rate that we were going. It was like trudging through heavy snow. Thank God for Tobias' heritage. He told us how the Mohawk Indians ran. He suggested that we run their way or stick to the side of the path once we got back on it, and it would keep us from sinking into the dune. We were at the bottom when it wailed, and we heard it charging after us. I was already flying, for all I knew, from the adrenaline pouring into my veins. The sound of breaking glass shocked me, but I didn't stop running. I ran faster than any of them. I passed the 2 big trees and got out of the scrubbery. I passed the second large lake, and I reached the truck. I had covered the distance so fast that my chest was about to explode from pain. My asthma was acting up, and I started having trouble breathing. I didn't even bring an inhaler because I hadn't used it in so long. I found Jace's keys on the ground next to the car tires and just grabbed them. I couldn't do anything right now with my heart pounding and my lungs in anguish. I didn't even realize I left anybody behind in the dust. And frankly, the only thought on my mind was the horrible creature. A few moments later, Rhett and Tobias came hauling Jace over and put him in the back seat of the truck. I gave him the keys, and without them asking me if I was all right, they got in the truck and Rhett took the wheel. We turned on the truck and its engine revved up. The headlights came on and the yellow eyes reflected while it continued crawling for us. Rhett shouted the Lord's name and put his foot down on the pad. We ran the thing over, causing a huge thump. After that, we backed all the way out of the trail, and without paying any mind, we sped off down the roadways to the nearest hospital. Jace was in ICU for days until they managed to save him. As for us, well, we told our folks what had happened, and they thought we were all dropping acid. They wouldn't let us see each other, or Jace, for months, until some hiker got killed out in the place we were at. The whole city was in panic over this fiasco, and nobody wanted to leave their homes. No other killing happened. The police did a huge sweep of the nature park, and although they did find the remains and everything we reported, they found no creature, not even the blood. The mayor's response was to completely seal off the nature park and the 30 acres beside it, and the city made it illegal and punishable by fine to enter anywhere around it. I finally got to ask Jace what the fuck happened only a few months back. He had told me the breaking glass was his bottle of gin, with his last sip he had been saving, against the thing's face. So he cut up pretty badly. I've never set foot in the forest down here ever since. The Whisper of Grandfather Gray. My grandfather was a Lutheran minister. Growing up, he had 4 brothers. His wife, my grandmother, was an only child and a divorcee, a terrible blemish in the 1950s when they wed. Her first husband had been abusive, but even with that justification, a divorced woman marrying a minister in that day and age was an anomaly. Other than that, I know remarkably little about my grandparents. This story is about my grandfather, Grandfather Gray. We called him, though he was never scary to us. He had a big hearty laugh and would sometimes take the long way home down a big hill, so our tummies would toss. He'd let us decorate his office with streamers when we went to visit, and we mutually impersonated the mysterious figure of Echo that my sister and I had dreamed up one day as children. The joke stuck. Every time we visited, we'd dress up a mannequin in a costume and position it at the top of the stairs, saying that Echo had come to visit too. Over the years, we started sending tapes back and forth of our deeply modified recorded voices, always impersonating Echo. He usually had a riddle or joke for us. Sometimes he told us to be good or enjoy an upcoming trip. In turn, we'd create tapes and send them to him. He thought we were immensely talented and would tell anyone who'd listen that my sister and I were going to be famous broadcasters someday. I remember the day my grandfather died. It was March 1st, 1991. I was young, and he'd been sick as long as I could remember. He was always in and out of the hospital, having some procedure or running some test. But that never dampened his smile. His death wasn't unexpected. We went to visit him in the hospital before he passed. I remember picking out my best outfit. I think I knew it was the last time I'd see him alive. We traveled from central Pennsylvania for the funeral near Elmridge. It was scheduled for March 4th, my birthday. Looking back, I was unforgivably selfish about the arrangements. I pleaded and begged for it to be changed so we could observe my birthday, and when that didn't work, I resorted to guilt. It'll scar me for life, I promised. This did not turn out to be true. At least, I don't think it did. I'll never be able to celebrate a birthday without thinking about this day, I sneered. This turned out to be true, though I often reflect more on my poor character than any other aspect. You'll be sorry you scheduled it for that day, I threatened. This, as fate or other forces would have it, also turned out to be true. My aunt, uncle, and cousins came in from Pittsburgh for the viewing the night before the funeral. As I said before, my grandfather was a minister and almost the entire parish came out to wish him farewell. It was unreasonably long and terribly boring for my sister, my cousins, and me. Eventually, the 8 of us were told we could play quietly in the other rooms of the funeral home. Before long, we found the kitchen and proceeded to dare one another to consume the packs of sugar we found there. By the time the viewing was over and my parents came to get us, we were unruly, sugar-fueled terrors. They packed us all in cars and shuttled us back to my grandmother's house, a 3-story home with plenty of spare bedrooms to sleep all the guests. We ran screaming from room to room, high on sugar and the company of one another. My mom and aunt somehow got us all washed and changed, then dragged us up to bed, threatening that if we didn't stay in bed and go to sleep, there'd be hell to pay. Now, in my cousin's family, there is a special birthday competition to see who can wish the birthday girl or boy happy birthday first on their big day. So that night, as my mom tucked me in, I was promised a shower of birthday wishes in the morning, even though it was the same day as the funeral. I did not awake to the promised birthday wishes. The first thing I remember was hearing screams. We woke up late, very late, though no one could say exactly how late at first. The power had gone out overnight, most likely due to the near foot of snow that had fallen so far. Without power, none of the alarms had gone off, and we'd all slept just as late as we pleased. My dad had to run out and fire up the old wagon to see the time. It was 9:07 a.m. The funeral was at 10 a.m., half an hour away, in good travel conditions. There were 8 kids and 5 adults in the house who were not showered, dressed, or fed. The immediate consensus was that we'd skip breakfast and showers were on an as-needed basis. Everyone flew into action and, miraculously, by 9:30 a.m., we were all buckled into cars and on our way. In our car was my dad behind the wheel, my mom, sister, and grandmother. We plowed through the snow at a desperate crawl. Each mile seemed to go slower than the last, with snow falling more and more rapidly as the minutes ticked past. Because of the heavy snowfall, we soon discovered our planned route, west on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, had been unexpectedly closed. We followed the detour onto the highway instead. It was only a minor setback. We could still make it, my father insisted, trying to convince himself as much as the rest of us. We didn't begin experiencing car trouble until we were getting off the highway. My cousins were behind us, all 8 of them crammed into their car. My mom leaned out the window and flailed urgently at them, trying to communicate that we needed to pull over. We stopped in a Barlow's parking lot. There was more than a foot of snow on the ground by now, and our options were quickly deteriorating. We'd all come to terms with the sad reality that we were going to be late. Now it looked like we might not make it at all. As my dad and uncle were under the hood trying to figure out what was wrong with our wagon, my aunt crept over to me. She smiled weakly and bumped hips with me, trying to feel out my mood. I half-heartedly smiled at her and hugged my coat tighter as the sky pelted us with white flakes. "I feel bad," she confided. "In all the rush this morning, I forgot to wish you happy birthday." I beamed. "Who was first?" she asked. "You," I said. Everyone else forgot. A burst of laughter overcame her. I was confused. How was that funny? Just as she was stopping, another wave of laughter seized her, and soon she was nearly doubled over from laughing so hard. Everyone was staring at her by the time she regained her composure. She smiled, a big wide smile that seemed so out of place with the mood of the morning. She squatted near me. Grandfather Gray remembered, she said, gesturing at the car and snow and the world around. Heck, he's only been up there 3 days and he's already running the place. Guess he didn't want his funeral to be today, either. In the end, the 14 of us all piled into my uncle's car for the final 5 miles of the trip. We didn't make it on time, but we made it. On the way back, we stopped at my parents' car. It started right away this time and rode fine for the trip to the cemetery and later back home. My parents never figured out what the problem was. On the way back to Stonehaven after the funeral, my sister and I found an unmarked tape in the back seat of the old wagon. We played it later when we got home and found a mysterious message recorded on it. Though it didn't identify the recorder by name, the voice sounded too similar to Echo to be anyone but him. The tape explained that sometimes life doesn't go our way, but that the people who love us will always try to do their best for us. It signed off with a promise that he'd always use every resource at his disposal to ensure our happiness. He always did. When we tried to replay the message, nothing was on the tape but static. It has been 25 years since my grandfather died. To this day, I believe that he was behind the trials of that morning. Between the rogue snowstorm, the power outage, and the car trouble, it's just too many events for me to chalk it up to mere coincidence. And if that wasn't enough, my sister and I both heard the fortuitous message on Echo's final tape. Not all ghost stories are scary. The Phantom Grip. There wasn't much about 2015 that didn't completely suck. My marriage was falling to pieces. My spouse had grown cold and indifferent. Our son hadn't been diagnosed with autism yet. He was still a toddler, but we knew there was something off about him. We knew something was wrong. By summer, I'd moved my belongings into the guest quarters, and that became my bedroom. It was the beginning of the end, with the two of us in bitter denial, or possibly waiting for the other to end it first. A 5 a.m. alarm got me up for work every weekday morning, and I spent most wakeful moments trying to find a way out of dump truck driving and construction. My spouse was less than supportive. I didn't have the funds for college. I was too busy to learn a new trade or skill. Once in a while, I'd come up with a cool sketch or painting. Sometimes I'd write a poem that people appreciated, but I didn't have the talent or skill to replace the earnings of my day job. So, every weekday, it was a 10 to 12-hour shift of double clutching a tandem axle Mack. I'd haul a flatbed trailer with heavy equipment for a paving crew to get the mortgage and bills paid. The second Friday of June didn't seem any different from any other weekday. It was payday. I planned on spending time with my little one, putting him to bed, and getting into a cheap bottle of whiskey before passing out in the guest room. For the time being, I was still on the clock and getting ready for my last run. My foreman, Mike, asked me as a special favor to take an overloaded flatbed a few miles down the road. Normally, I would have said no, but I liked Mike, I didn't want to argue, and I just wanted to wrap up the day and start my weekend. My worst case scenario, I thought, was an overload fine from a DOT officer. The crew loaded a paver, a skid steer, and a roller onto a flatbed trailer, designed to hold 2/3 of the combined weight of all that equipment. Everything was already chained down. I told the guys I'd see them in the yard after I hooked up to the trailer. I eased off the clutch and into first gear. I could feel the Mack truck struggle to pull the overloaded flatbed trailer. I got to my first traffic light without demolishing the dump truck stopped ahead of me, only because I began to downshift and brake well ahead of time. I realized my seatbelt was off and tried to put it on, but it wouldn't budge. The light turned green. The sky opened up. A torrential downpour pissed all over everything in sight. I started driving but kept the rig 10 miles per hour below the posted speed limit, convinced that would keep me safe. I passed a quarry on my left and began my descent down a steep grade on the way to my stop. I got part of the way down the ominous hill and traffic was stopped ahead in the distance. I gently applied the brakes, but the truck tires started skidding on the wet road. The trailer began to jackknife over the double yellow lines into oncoming motorists. I eased off the brakes, regained control of the trailer, and reapplied them. The same thing happened. All the while, I'm still moving towards stopped traffic, going 30 miles an hour downhill with a combined vehicle weight easily exceeding 60,000 pounds. The old country road had one lane headed downhill, one lane headed uphill, no shoulders and nothing but trees on either side. As a last-ditch effort, I pulled the parking brake and started stabbing at the brake pedal. Crashing a commercial truck is almost always fatal for the driver. Not having a working seatbelt wasn't really helping my odds. The cars stopped ahead were now less than 2 tractor-trailer lengths away, and I couldn't stop the truck. I thought about my wife. I remembered being in love with her before we started hating each other. I thought about my son. I thought about the people stopped ahead and their families. I thought about how much it was going to suck dying in a dump truck from colliding into the trees on the side of the road. A collision was inevitable, and there was no way in hell I was going to allow innocent motorists to get killed. My last run had turned into a suicide mission. Being a non-religious heathen, I thought perchance there may be something close by. Some ghost that watches over truckers and bikers. Some spirit, perhaps, inhabiting those woods. I called out to it. Make it quick. That was my first and final prayer to whatever sprite inhabits that forest. I didn't see any fucking way possible I'd survive what I do next. And I didn't want to linger in agony following the crash. I just wanted my death to be swift. I turned the steering wheel away from the traffic and into the woods. As soon as my front wheels left the pavement, the bumpy, wooded terrain shook me violently, throwing me into a world of hurt like I'd never known. As an at-risk teen, I'd been jumped, hit with chains and bats. I'd been beaten mercilessly by my bastard of a father as a child. Nothing I'd experienced could have prepared me for the beating the inside of that truck put on every inch of my body. The trailer snapped off and headed into another portion of the woods. The truck roared into the forest with me as its hostage, mowing down vegetation, leaving hunks of metal all about as the tree branches of the forest fought back against this hostile, diesel-powered invasion. I gripped the wheel for dear life while smacking all about the console, the control panel, the shifter, and feeling every abrasive texture grind away at my flesh. The truck hit a big bump that sent me headfirst into the ceiling. Blood went everywhere. Then it hit a dip and skidded to a violent stop. A terrible pressure pushed into my chest. I thought I was having a heart attack. Somehow, I didn't go flying through the glass as the horrifying ordeal came to an abrupt halt. As quickly as the crash ended, so did that awful blow to my chest. I exited the smoldering wreck that was once a sturdy Mack truck. I was covered in blood and had what seemed like a sheet of plastic, a grocery bag perhaps, stuck to my head. It wasn't a grocery bag hanging off my head. I didn't realize at the moment that my scalp had been partially degloved. It peeled right off my noggin, my skull exposed and blood pouring all over me. It was hanging off the side of my head, I imagine, much like a peel hanging off the side of a piece of fruit. It must have happened when I hit the ceiling of the truck's interior. What hurt more than anything at the moment was my chest. It couldn't have been the steering wheel. It wasn't a heart attack. I didn't know what it was that kung fu'd the ever-living shit out of my sternum. I was just glad I was still alive. Only moments later, I was getting put into a C-collar strapped to a backboard and loaded into an ambulance by paramedics. My Blitz t-shirt, my favorite fucking punk rock shirt, was blood-soaked and sheared off me by the medics. They took my vitals and asked questions meant to gauge my level of consciousness. Then, for a moment or two, they fell silent. Am I gonna make it? I joked as I turned my head to see both medics staring at my sternum, mouths agape and eyes bugged out in bewilderment. After a second, they assured me everything would be fine and continued with routine measures during medical transport. I thought about the day's events at the hospital. I got all doped up by the docs, got my scalp stapled and bandaged, and got admitted to my room. I thought about my terrible judgment, the last-minute decision, the dying man's prayer, and the blow to the chest, while crashing and somehow not flying through the windshield. I thought about it all in my hospital room. I stood bare-chested before a mirror gazing at my bruise. A Across my chest, spanning about 12 inches in length, was a deep purple mark in the shape of a giant, ghastly hand.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.